Many a rebel from all reaches of the galaxy have found their way to Starfleet.
Hey, welcome back to Screen Crush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all the Easter eggs, references, and in-canon shout-outs that we caught in Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 5, Imposters. The episode opens on what appears to be a regular old day on the USS Titan. We get some classic original series bridge sound effects, and our resident new Vulcan officer, Lieutenant Tuvok, saying something is fascinating. Now this, of course, was the catchphrase of another famous Starfleet Vulcan named Tuvok? No, dude, Spock.
Fascinating.
And Ensign La Forge ticks off some starship stuff that she's doing, saying
RCS, ICS.
ODN. RCS stands for Reaction Control Thruster, ODN stands for Optical Data Network, and of course, ISC is an old nickname from deep in Star Trek canon which refers to the college nickname of your mom. Anyways, Jack suddenly comes in uniform and clutching a phaser. We get a close-up of his phaser, and again, in the previous episodes, this is definitely closer to the style of phasers that we saw in Star Trek V and Star Trek VI than anything we've seen from this era of Trek. Jack murders all the crew members with his phaser, which feels very undiscovered country.
Oh my god, is Jack Crusher like Anakin Skywalker? Is he like on the path to the dark side? Or like, is he Kylo Ren? Is Jack gonna end up like killing Picard and kissing Khan's granddaughter?
I don't think Star Trek's gonna turn Jack into a Sith Lord.
But his eyes just go all evil. He's the Sith Lord we've been looking for.
Nah, Doug, this is Star Trek. The name of this episode is Imposters, which, more than any Star Trek episode in a very long time, directly addresses the fallout from the Dominion War. That is the massive war that was fought in the latter seasons of Deep Space Nine. We begin with Riker saying acting captain's log, continuing from the closing of episode 4 when Picard said Admiral's log. We have not heard Riker record a log voiceover since the days of the Next Generation. Riker then says that the Titan has limped to the edge of the Alpha Quadrant, which confirms that the Rhyton system was in the Beta Quadrant. 7 talks about a special optical imaging scanner that has been standard protocol since the Dominion War, and that this device verifies that people coming on board the ship are not shapeshifters. Now this means that it's going to be very hard to determine who the real imposters are from now on. In a heart-to-heart, Picard tries to make Starfleet like a really hip place for cool outsiders, saying,
Many a rebel from all reaches of the galaxy have found their way to Starfleet.
Rebel.
This, of course, foreshadows the return of Laren later in the episode, who we first met in the Next Generation episode, Ensign Ro.
Rebel. She was a young Bajoran.
Alright, high five. Meanwhile, Worf and Raffi are sparring on La Sirena, and we hear the Jerry Goldsmith Klingon theme again. And Worf even busts out a classic Klingon knife called a Doktog, first introduced in Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. Worf also briefly meditates in the middle of the fight, which feels like a real Qui-Gon Jinn kind of move. Pretty soon, Raffi and Worf stop messing around and get on the trail of another master criminal. Worf looks up a list of suspects, and we see the following names. L'Rell of Renia, which references a thief from Deep Space Nine who only appeared in one episode, who mourns for Morn. Next on the list is Sneed of Ferenginar, who we already saw, and Toluco of Romulus, who we should remember from early in Picard Season 3.
Because this is Toluco.
But then the crime list cuts deeper, and we see the names Morn of Luria, Brunt of Ferenginar, Thadian Okina of Omega. Now, Morn was a constant figure at Quark's bar in Deep Space Nine and modeled on the Cheers character of Norm.
Afternoon, everybody. Norm!
Now, Morn never spoke on camera, but we always caught him like at the tail end of a deep conversation.
You know, Morn, he never shuts up.
Brunt was a Ferengi liquidator from Deep Space Nine, played by the multi-talented Star Trek guest actor Jeffrey Combs. Now, Okina references William Campbell's character from the TNG episode The Outrageous Okina. This brings us to Kren, later to be revealed to be a Vulcan gangster. Now, though we don't know he's a Vulcan at first, his criminal record on Worf's screen does say that the Vulcan Ministry of Justice wants him. So, a tiny Easter egg tells us that he's probably a Vulcan before we even see him. Raffi is wearing a mobile emitter just before she and Worf meet Kren. Now, this is 29th century technology that was introduced in Voyager and allows holograms to walk around, or in this case for Raffi to project a faux hologram version of herself. Kren later calls this out, saying,
Were you under the impression I would not recognize a mobile emitter?
And by the way, Kren is played by Kirk Acevedo, who previously played Ramses in Terry Metalis' 12 Monkeys, alongside Todd Stashwick, who plays Shaw in this show, and Aaron Stanford, who played Sneed a few episodes back. Kren rocks a Vulcan Idic, which was first introduced in the original series episode, Is There in Truth No Beauty? Raffi later says that she can't believe there's a Vulcan dumb enough to become a gangster, but we have seen Vulcan criminals before. Spock's brother Sybok stole the Enterprise in The Final Frontier, and in Strange New Worlds, we learned that Spock's fiancée, T'Pring, was in charge of capturing Vulcan criminals. Kren rocking a Vulcan Idic may seem anti-Vulcan, but plenty of mobsters wear religious jewelry, and Kren sorta owns it by saying,
There could be no utopia without crime, Ergo, an organized criminal enterprise is logical.
Kryn forces Raffi and Worf into a battle to the death, to which Raffi quips,
Yield, fight to the death.
How original.
yeah, she really should have said how original series, since we've seen Vulcans making people fight to the death ever since the classic episode Amok Time. Raffi seems to kill Worf during their duel, to which Worf says,
Today was a good day to die.
Now lots of Klingons have said this over the years, but Worf was the first we heard say it way back in the TNG episode Sins of the Father, when he said,
It is a good day to die, Doris, and the day is not yet over.
Worf is not dead, of course, but he used some kind of body control to simulate death, which he attributes to
The Kahless technique of regulating my heart rate.
Now this of course references Kahless, the religious messiah first mentioned in the original series episode The Savage Curtain.
Kahless, the unforgettable. The Klingon who set the pattern for his planet's tyrannies.
But he was featured more prominently in the TNG episode Rightful Heir.
I am Kahless, and I have returned.
It's also in a really good IDW comic right now I recommend you check out. But Worf and Raffi's discovery of a Vulcan gangster is not the biggest revelation of this week. Instead, the arrival of the USS Intrepid puts the episode into full Easter egg overdrive. At this point, Riker, Picard, Jack, and Beverly are all kind of criminals, and so a Starfleet ship, the USS Intrepid, is sent to pick them up. According to Picard production designer Dave Blast, this new Intrepid is a Duderstadt-class starship, or a Dudenus-class starship, or El Deuterino if you're not into the whole brevity thing.
That's quite a mouthful.
According to Blast, it's probably the 5th ship named Intrepid in Star Trek canon, but the first one we were aware of was destroyed off-screen in the original series in the episode The Immunity Syndrome, in which we were told that it had a crew filled with Vulcans.
The Intrepid. It just died.
Oh, and if you think that the new Intrepid has a rear-facing deflector dish, David Blast says that it's actually just an aft long-range sensor array. As Shaw takes Riker and Picard to face the music, Riker says,
You know, we have saved the galaxy more than a few times.
But how many times have Picard and or Riker actually saved the galaxy? I mean, they definitely saved the galaxy from the Borg in First Contact, and Riker certainly saved the galaxy from the Borg in The Best of Both Worlds. But, as Shaw quips,
You two have a real chicken and egg thing happening.
his list of rowdy times from Riker and Picard's glory days sounds like a rap sheet when he says,
They might remember that time that someone hot dropped the saucer section of the Enterprise D on a planet,
which he did in Star Trek Generations, and that Picard
threw the Prime Directive out the window so they could snog a villager on Baku.
and that happened in Star Trek Insurrection, and
The time that you boys nearly wiped out all of humanity by creating a time paradox.
which of course was from the TNG series finale All Good Things. Fair point about Baku and Insurrection. Like, billions of people could have benefited from this medicine, but they were supposed to die just because these people on the planet were good at sewing. Doesn't add up. Picard takes these criticisms in stride, looking at Riker and saying,
Those were the days.
which leads to another massive jolt of nostalgia from back in the day with the return of Michelle Forbes as Ro Laren.
I was not expecting that.
Riker says her name, Ro Laren, which should remind us that Bajorans have their family name first, and their given name second. Back in the TNG episode Ensign Ro, Picard incorrectly called her Ensign Laren, but she corrected him, saying,
The Bajoran custom has the family name first, the individual's name second. I am properly addressed as Ensign Ro.
Now this tradition continued in Deep Space Nine, which is why Major Kira Nerys is often called Major Kira and not Major Nerys. Before getting grilled by Ro, Picard and Riker debate about,
How the hell is Ro Laren back in Starfleet?
Riker reminds Picard,
That was 30 years ago. The Maquis are no longer an enemy.
this references the events of the TNG episode Preemptive Strike, in which Ro defected to a group of freedom fighters while on an undercover mission for Picard. Riker saying 30 years is right about dead on. 2370 was 32 years before the present of Picard Season 3 in 2402. Interestingly, Preemptive Strike, Ro's last appearance in Star Trek until now, was the penultimate episode of TNG, airing just 1 week before the series finale All Good Things. Picard mentions that,
The last time you saw her, she pulled a phaser on you.
which references the ending of Preemptive Strike when Ro tearfully ditched Riker and apologized to him, even though she was, yes, holding a phaser. When Ro grills Picard, she cuts her hand to prove that she has human blood. Back in the Deep Space Nine days, this was the fastest way to prove that you were not a shapeshifter. But while this is happening, Crusher discovers that this changeling could pass the traditional blood test. Crusher sends this info to Picard in a text message that reads, changelings can pass the blood test, which makes Jean-Luc firmly believe that this is not really Ro Laren.
That's suspicious.
Adding to Picard's suspicions that this isn't really Ro Laren is the fact that he notices
Your Bajoran earring.
This references the fact that in Ensign Ro, Picard allowed Ro to wear her Bajoran earring even though it was somehow against Starfleet's dress code policy at the time. Ro takes Picard into the holodeck, which is still set to the LA-10 forward, and once in the bar, we see that Picard presses a button that reads Safety Protocols Off. This connects to an Easter egg that's been present in the end credits of Picard Season 3 since the first episode, which shows this exact command being executed with the words Safety Protocols Offline. While Picard busts out a phaser, he says that it belonged to Guinan. This is likely a reference to the episode Night Terrors, in which Guinan revealed that she had a massive phaser rifle stashed underneath the bar. Picard says,
You do remember Guinan, don't you?
Which alludes to Ro and Guinan's relationship throughout TNG, including the one time that Ro and Guinan were both turned into children.
Oh yeah? I can jump higher.
Picard says,
You broke my heart.
And Ro replies,
And she broke mine.
This pain proves to both of them that neither of them are shapeshifters, and we quickly learn that Ro is on a personal mission to find all the changelings that have infiltrated Starfleet. Picard says that they should take their findings to Admiral Janeway.
Let's take this to Admiral Janeway.
Hey, Easter egg. But Ro says they can't get through her handlers. Ro also says that the plans for Frontier Day are suspicious, which is something we've been hearing about since the first episode. Ro gives Picard her earring, which we think is a symbolic gesture and a callback to TNG. But later, Riker realizes that it contains all of Ro's research into the Starfleet conspiracy. As Ro heads back to the Intrepid to buy the crew some time, she realizes a bomb has been planted on her shuttle, and the numbers on that bomb match what we saw on other Dominion tech in Deep Space Nine. The episode ends with Ro's heroic sacrifice to save the Titan and with her instructions to Picard.
Jean-Luc, it's up to you now. You finished what I started.
In Ro's search, we see several Easter eggs, which also existed in Raffi's research way back in Episode 1, including the idea that the Enterprise F is scheduled for early decommissioning. Riker and Picard realize that Ro's spy assets on the ground are Worf and Raffi, making the reconnection of Worf and Raffi with Picard bittersweet. When Worf appears on the screen, we hear the First Contact Jerry Goldsmith theme.
Admiral. Captain. This is unexpected.
Reminding us of the theme of found family between the TNG crew, including Ro Laren. Star Trek has had a lot of emotional deaths throughout the franchise, but the death of Ro in Picard Season 3 is going to go down as one of the most shocking, and also perfectly in character with the spirit of who Ro is. She came on to TNG fighting, and she went down fighting too. After the emotional roller coaster of Episode 4, it seemed impossible that Picard Episode 5 could top it, but somehow it did. But what about next week? With Worf reuniting with the crew and changelings everywhere, could things get even bigger? Are the crew of the Titan officially rebels now? And what the hell is going on with Jack? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.